Okay, by my clock, it is 7 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. We have a lot to go through tonight. Thank you so much for joining me, folks. My name is Laura Winnie. I'm the Education and Community Engagement Coordinator for DuPage County Animal Services. And tonight we're going to talk about our wild neighbors, Chicagoland's wildlife. Now, we're not going to cover all of them. We're mostly going to stick to the mammals, but we're going to go over a lot of stuff today. So first, we're going to go over what we can do to live humanely with animals, what those tenets look like. Then we're going to go over some common wildlife issues and conflicts. We want to learn how to be helpful to wildlife. Then how can we resolve conflicts humanely? And also, who is available to help out when we're just struggling with something? So before we dive into that, a little bit of Zoom housekeeping. Please keep yourselves muted during the entire presentation. I am recording this to post to our YouTube page later on. And also, please keep your video off as well, because if too many of us have video on, it gets a little laggy. Zoom doesn't love it when a bunch of people's videos are on and I'm playing video at the same time. So for ease sake, if you guys can just keep yourselves muted and keep your video off. Now, that being said, if you do have a question at some point during the presentation, feel free to throw it into the chat box at any time, but I won't check the chat box until the end of the presentation. Presentation will last about an hour, and then I'll stick around at the end for any questions that you have. And then, of course, I'll give you my contact information. So if something strikes you later, you know how to reach out. I'm also going to throw our program survey link into the chat box. If you have time, we're always looking for new program ideas and ways to improve our programs. It's a very short couple-minute survey, so please, if you can take the time, I'd appreciate it. Now, with the logistical stuff out of the way, let's get started. One thing that always surprises me about the wildlife human interactions is how surprised people are to see wildlife in their environments. And I love this cartoon because it really does illustrate that wildlife was here first. We moved into their territory, especially as our suburbs keep expanding. We're giving them less and less space to strictly call their own homes. And we'll talk about this a little bit later on in the presentation. Wildlife doesn't see a human building and go, oh, that's for humans, that's not for me. They're going to see an available space that's warm, dry, and comfortable and think, oh, that's a nice, warm, comfortable spot for me to nap in. So the way that we see the world and the way that wildlife sees the world can often be very different and can cause some of the conflicts we'll talk about. Now, supported by the Humane Society of the United States, DuPage County Animal Services, and many, many other animal-oriented organizations, are these basic tenets to promote a humane world. So what do I mean by a humane world? Basically, we want to have respect for the environment. So if the environment suffers, we suffer. That's this grand idea called One Health, and it looks at environmental health, wild animal health, and human health, and how they are all connected. So if something is going wrong in the environment, that is affecting the wild animals, but it is also affecting the people who live there or who survive off of the elements in that environment. We also want to have an understanding of living things and understand that it's really only in the movies where squirrels have a mean agenda and they're out to get you. Okay, that's Hollywood, that's not real life. And the idea is that when we have a conflict, say with a squirrel that's destroying property, is understanding that they're not doing it to be destructive. They're not doing it thinking, ha, the Joneses, I'm going to get you. Nobody's going to keep up with you now. They're doing it for a purpose for their own survival. So we want to resolve conflict using non-lethal means, using humane methods whenever possible. Again, to promote this humane world where we are living harmoniously and where those three factors are in balance: the environment, the wildlife, and us. So let's talk a little bit about the usual suspects that we see here in the Chicagoland area. So at DuPage County Animal Services, we do get a lot of calls on wildlife that are causing issues, that are just being a nuisance. They're destroying stuff, they're eating stuff that they're not supposed to, they're living places we don't think they should be living, or maybe, we're concerned about them. People are worried about, are they healthy? What's going on? They're acting weird. What's going on? So they'll give us a call for advice. And 100%, if you have a question, feel free to call us. I have the number at the very end so you guys can write it down, because that's what we're here for. We are here to help people understand the animals in their homes and outside their homes and have everybody living as harmoniously as possible. So let's take a look at some of those typical nuisance concern calls. Bats are a big one, especially in the fall when the little juvenile bats have all left the nest and they're looking for new places. Here in Illinois, we have 13 species of bats. So I've got some pictures there. And what's great is the ones in Illinois, the bats in Illinois, they're insectivores. So they eat all the bugs that drive us crazy. It is estimated that one bat can consume up to 3,000 insects in one night. That's a lot of mosquito bites I don't have to have. So bats are awesome. Bats are our friends. Now, when they roost, they like to be in secluded, warm locations, and they'll hang upside down. That's how they rest. Some species of bats will hibernate for the winter, so they'll seek out consistently warm locations like caves, abandoned mines, or even unsecured buildings. So then that's when you'll get to see like the colonies. So a lot of them staying in one location until it's mating season in the spring, coming up here in a couple months. Now, with bats, our biggest potential conflict is that there are a lot of myths about bats. So some people are afraid of them because they don't understand what's going on. My mother is one of those. She really, really does not like bats. She sees them flying around at night and she goes inside. They don't even need to be anywhere near her. She can just see them in the distance. A bat is outside and boop, she's inside. And it's important to remember that for the most part, that's going to be an irrational fear. Seeing a bat outside doesn't mean anything. It just means that it's hunting, okay? And hunting insects and mosquitoes, which is awesome. So a healthy bat is not going to try to attack you. They use echolocation to sense their surroundings, which is super neat. So they're sending out sounds and they're basically incredible mathematicians because they're paying attention to how the sounds bounce off of things and come back to them to figure out the distance of stuff. Okay. They can swoop when they discover prey. So when they discover those insects, they can swoop down very quickly, but that's not an attack behavior. We're not their prey. We are much, much bigger than what they are trying to get. And even though they can seem frighteningly large, for the most part, bats in Illinois are going to be about a hand width. So from pinky to thumb, that's going to be their wingspan, and the actual body is going to be like in the palm of our hand. So that's a good amount of the bats that we see here locally. They're much smaller than they appear when they're swooping around. So that's important to remember too. Now, bats will bite if they feel threatened and if they are handled improperly. So if you do see a downed bat, so maybe you had one that was roosting somewhere and it fell down, or it was injured and it fell down, it got attacked by something, fell down, never ever grab hold of a bat with your bare hands. Okay. You can use a container to move it. So, just take a piece of Tupperware you're hopefully not going to reuse again. Place it over the bat, get a piece of cardboard, nice stiff cardboard, slide it up underneath. And you can try to move it to a nearby tree where it can recover, perhaps move on. You definitely want to keep it away from pets or children because that bite, oh, excuse me, that bite is going to be the biggest problem that we have with bats because in our area, they are the most likely carrier of rabies. And we're going to talk about that a lot in a little bit. So don't really want to go into that right now. Anytime a pet or an animal, like a child or an animal has been with a bat or has been handling a bat, that's when we need to be concerned that there's a potential bite because the bites are pretty small. I mean, I mentioned bats are pretty small. Their teeth are tiny. Children and animals don't always notice a bite. And if they are found inside a home where someone is sleeping, it is possible that they could bite without you knowing it. So those are the biggest instances where we need to worry, where they could have transmitted rabies. Beyond that, they're outside, they're not anywhere near people, they're not going to be a conflict for us. They may want to roost in unsecured areas of our buildings. That we will talk about in a little bit. But for the most part, the conflict with bats comes from the fact that a lot of people are scared of them. They act weird to us, right? And it's important to understand that a healthy bat is going to do much, much more good for your environment than it can possibly harm you. A nice healthy bat is fabulous to have. So let's move on to squirrels because this is one of the most common animals you're going to see anywhere in the US. They are abundant in northern Illinois. We have 4 distinct species. We have the eastern gray, the fox, the red, and the southern flying, though red squirrels are a little bit more common in southern Illinois. We do sometimes see them up here. We get a lot of calls about squirrels for property damage. Like I said, they're not trying to be jerks. They're trying to efficiently survive. So you might find them in places where we feel they don't belong, like in sheds, garages, attics, even in the walls of our house. But they see those spaces the same way they see a nice hollow tree. Oh, it's dry, it's warm, it's safe, nobody else lives here. Perfect, I'm gonna move in. If they can make a nice nest there, they will. Now, trapping and removing animals is a short-term solution if they still have access to that same space. We're going to talk a lot about that later. So you definitely want to make sure that you're repairing any holes that you see in siding, soffitting, near trim, and keep your trees trimmed back to the best of your ability to prevent them access from the roof because squirrels can jump up to 10 feet. So you want to keep those branches trimmed as nice as possible away so that they don't have that easy bridge access to your house. If you are feeding wild birds, they are known bird food raiders, and there are many different types of devices you can put on the bird feeders to prevent them access to. You might also notice them digging holes and storing food, which can get a little annoying to our gardener folks. Rabbits are another very common animal to see here. In Illinois, we have the eastern cottontails. They are very abundant. Breeding season started last month and goes through September. So basically, they're 1 month more in breeding season than they aren't, if that makes sense. Females can have multiple litters a year with up to 8 babies each litter. So the most common problem we get calls about is household gardens and wanting to just nibble on all of the plants. They may also be digging under fences and sheds and using that as a burrow to have their litters, or even just having their litters in your backyard. Now, rabbits aren't considered a dangerous animal, more of a nuisance. And we do get a lot of calls for found baby bunnies. And when those moms have their litters, for example, underneath our decks or in our backyards, what do? We're going to talk more about that later. We do sometimes get calls too with a little bit of confusion on, is the bunny I'm seeing a domestic or a wild? So I just wanted to point out the picture that you see here. This is a typical Eastern cottontail. They're going to have a nice sandy colored coat that's going to help them blend into shrubbery, bushes, tall grasses. They're also going to be a little bit more on the skinny side than our domestic rabbits. Domestic rabbits are going to come in all sorts of different colors and patterns that would not lend to camouflage out in the wild. So if you see a rabbit in your neighborhood and it doesn't look like this, it is possible that either someone has mistakenly let loose a domestic rabbit, or it has escaped, or something else like that has happened. And unfortunately, due to the rabbit's coat color, where they can't camouflage, they're going to be a nice, easy target for predators. And also, if they were a former pet, they probably don't have the instincts to fend for themselves and get food. So definitely want to call that in. If you do see a bunny that you suspect is a pet bunny, because they're not going to have an easy time out in the wild like their wild cousins. Of all of the animals that we talk about today, probably the one with the most conflict is going to be raccoons. They are also probably the most well adapted to living with humans. So a lot of these animals, like rabbits, will, completely avoid us. They'll avoid where we are, except maybe to come and get the garden. Raccoons seem to thrive living near us because we offer all sorts of tasty goodies. Now, these are normally nocturnal animals, so they are typically most active at night, but it is okay to see these animals out and about during the day. The same is true for foxes, coyotes, possums, skunks, because they will be active when their food is most available. So let's say it's trash day. You put your trash out in the morning, you go to work, it gets picked up sometime in the afternoon, and that trash bin sitting full of stinky goodies is just waiting for someone to come along and enjoy the buffet. Your animals in your neighborhood are going to learn the schedule pretty quickly, and they're going to know, yes, smorgasbord, Friday, 2 p.m. Awesome. So perfectly normal to see them available out and about during the day when those food sources are available. They are very opportunistic. They'll eat anything. Now, if you are having a conflict with a raccoon, it's important to know where they live. So the preferred habitat for them is going to be a hollowed out tree. But just like squirrels, they don't distinguish between a tree and a human house the same way we do. Okay, so if something is accessible and comfortable, they're going to live there. So we definitely want to keep up to date on our home maintenance, blocking any access, and even using specific wildlife proof materials so that we're not creating these inviting spaces for them to go into. Probably the biggest conflict we have, besides living in spaces we don't want them to, is food theft. Raccoons are the world's best wildlife burglars. They can get into things, they can manipulate handles and levers and all sorts of things. They've even been known to break into buildings through doors and windows and other access points to get to the food inside the house. So if you are having issues with raccoons in your area due to, let's say they're getting into the trash and scattering it all around, if at all possible, store your trash inside, make sure that the lid is nice and tight, and have it so that it's hard for them to open it up, okay? So if you do have trash pickup in the morning, don't put it out the night before, because that's just going to invite them to come out and spend, 2 a.m. breakfast buffet right in your driveway. Possums are so cool. They are our only marsupial meaning they carry their babies around in a pouch like a kangaroo. So they're America's kangaroo, and they get a really bad rep because, you know, they're kind of ugly, and I get it, but I think it's kind of like William Dafoe. They're so ugly, they're cute. And I mean, look at that cute little pink nose. It's adorable. Now, they are mostly nocturnal. They have a preference for staying in wooded areas, and they will mostly eat carrion. They're scavengers, so they're going to clean up all that dead, gross stuff that we don't want to have to deal with off the side of the roads and stuff. They're our cleanup crew, and they take care of those deceased animals for us. They are also going to dine on insects, worms, eggs, amphibians, berries, fruit. So they're omnivores. They'll eat what's available. Now, potential conflicts with possums is pretty rare because they are not an aggressive animal. They might show their teeth, they might hiss at you, but it's a defensive thing. You know, it's whistling in the dark for them. They're just trying to scare away whatever is scaring them. They also might play possum. So the first thing I ask people when they say, "Oh, I've got a dead possum in my yard, what do?" I always ask, "Are you sure it's dead?" Because it might be doing what possums do. So you want to double check. You know, a lot of times they might stay in one area until dark where they feel comfortable moving. So if possible, you know, leave them alone for a little bit, see if they move out on their own. And we will often get calls for just really weird behavior from our perception. You know, they're just being possums, but it looks weird to us, especially when we see them out and about during the day. Now, there is the possibility that possums will be digging around in your yard, and for our gardeners, that can be absolutely devastating. But what you need to understand there is that they're not digging for fun. They're digging with a purpose. So if they're digging, it means that you have things living in the soil that taste good. So those worms, those other insects, it's annoying, but we can look on the bright side. It's nice free pest control, and they're doing you a solid if you do have a garden, because some of those insects can harm our gardens. Probably the most infamous wild animal in the area is the skunk. They are definitely the most pungent. We can pretty much identify them from a great distance by just the smell. They do produce a sulfurous liquid in defense, and they can spray it up to 10 feet. So if you see a skunk, it's best to cross the street and maintain that safe distance out of the spray zone. They are typically nocturnal, but again, they can be out during the day looking for food. They can go after garbage, but they're not as agile as raccoons. So it's going to be like if your trash can is overflowing and you have some bags sitting by the bin, that's going to be their sweet spot. I would say that if you're if you're out with a dog, because most of these conflicts come from unwanted encounters. So let's say you're out walking the dog, or you're out in the backyard and you round a corner and whoop, there's a skunk. We're surprised, the skunk is surprised, and we end up smelling bad. They're infamous for a reason. They don't often spray us. We typically, you know, are cognizant enough of our environment to get out of the way in time. It's more likely going to be our dogs. And, you know, then the dog brings the skunk stink into the house, and, you know, nobody likes that. So it does create this negative association with these animals who are defending themselves from a potential predator, and it just really inconveniences and annoys the heck out of us. So there are commercial products that you can use to de-skunk your pets or yourself that you can have on hand. From my understanding, because a few of our officers have been sprayed, the best is to go to the Humane Society's website for their recipe. You don't want to put it together in advance because you need the chemical reaction right at the time to work on that. And keep in mind, it can take several washings with the concoction to get the skunk smell completely out. So try to keep your pets on a nice short leash when you're out moving around. Keep unsecured garbage secured so that they're less likely to, go after those trash bags. So a secure lid to your trash can and not have anything sitting on the ground is going to be a good enough deterrent if it's a skunk going after your garbage. Coyotes and foxes are out and about this time of year, and we are getting lots of calls about them because they're much more visible right now. It is their breeding season. It's coyote and fox date night every night. And it's ingrained in us to be fearful of these animals due to some common misconceptions. Now, it can be a little hard to tell the difference between these animals. So I have the two foxes that we typically have in this area, the red fox and the gray fox, and then the coyote there on the bottom. So red fox typically has a reddish coat, the black legs, and the black ear tips. Gray foxes, believe it or not, can be gray, red, or brown, but they have a black stripe down their spine and a black tipped tail. So you can see in the picture there that stripe going down the tail and how it creates that tip there. Coyotes are much taller than foxes. Foxes are actually on the small side, and coyotes are also going to look a lot more dog-like in their skull shape and how they move. Now, both of these species are considered nocturnal, but keep in mind that if our raccoons, our skunks, our possums are out more during the day because their food is available, then those animals' predators are going to be more active during the day to go after their food. So it's kind of a chain reaction there. So you might see them more active during the day if they are going after other animals in the area, or like I said, right now during breeding season, when they're all on high alert and looking for a nice hot date. They are essential members of our ecosystem. We do not want to see what it would look like here without these animals to help keep those other animal populations under control. Nobody wants a population explosion of skunks. That's just really not fun for anybody there because the chances of having those negative encounters increases with the more skunks you have in a given area. So a lot of the calls that we get are about actual or perceived threats. They are highly adaptable animals, and they, like I said, we have this built-in notion that they're going to go after our animals. They're going to go after our children. They're going to go after us. That's highly unlikely. The biggest conflicts are going to come from these animals if somebody has been feeding them. In fact, they did a study in the early 2000s that found very few reliable reports of coyote attacks, and most of them involved coyotes who were being fed by humans. So these humans were feeding the animals were losing their natural wariness, their natural fear of humans, and then we're creating more conflict. Now, yes, smaller animals, cats and small dogs can be seen as prey by coyotes and even foxes. The biggest thing there, we'll talk about this later, is to make sure that we're not leaving our small animals unsupervised, especially at dawn and at dusk when these wild animals are most active. We'll talk more about that in a bit. Probably our most familiar animal is going to be the deer. They are well adapted to human environments. You'll see them all the time. Whitetail is the most likely to be seen here. And the basic issues that we have with deer is going after yards and gardens. So they love heavily fertilized ornamental plants and garden plants. And what you're looking for is, if you can see this plant, how they are biting a little bit further from the roots. They're not like shearing off right at the roots, and how it's kind of even all the way around. You might also see a browse line So basically, where the foliage ends is how tall the tallest deer in that area is. So that's as far as they can reach, and they've just chomped all the way down that tree line. So if you notice those in the area, that might mean you have an active deer population going after your stuff. You also might have run-ins during their rut season. So their dating season goes from October to January. So we've been out of it for a couple months now. They're mostly on the quiet side right now, hunkering down. Moms are, eating as much as they can for healthy babies in the spring. But during rut season, it's more common to have car crashes because the boys are a little bit crazy, and because the boys are a little bit crazy and chasing after the girls are a little bit crazy. They may not be paying as much to their surroundings as we would like. So making sure that we can prevent access to our gardens is going to be huge to ending any potential conflicts, and also just being extra wary on roads along wooded areas when we are driving during these months. So like me, I'm sure a lot of you absolutely love wild animals and want to know what we can do to help them in this world that's ever increasingly making it harder for them to survive. So I do want to spend a little bit of time on how we can identify when they have issues and what we can do to give them their best chance. So when we need to help them, going back to those humane living tenants, if we see an injured, a stuck, or an ill animal, we want to call it in. If they are already deceased, it's not as urgent to call it in, but we still want to make sure that it's not going to cause issues if animals are drawn to the carcass. And if they died due to an illness, we don't want that illness spread even posthumously. So we do want to make sure that we're paying attention to that and understanding, what does an injury look like? What does an illness look like? What does trapped look like? Sometimes it may seem obvious, but it can be surprising. So let's start with an obvious one. If you can see the injury or you saw them get injured, so if they were hit by a car or you can see bleeding, you can see a broken limb, that's going to be something that you want to call it in. You definitely don't want to approach them yourself unless you are a wildlife professional, because you don't want to cause more harm than good. If they are unable to move or they are limited in their movements, there are organizations that are able to help. If they are still able to move away, it's going to be much harder to get them. And again, trying to chase an injured animal can cause more harm than it helps. If the animal is caught on something, do not try to release it yourself, because we want a professional to assess if they were injured while they were caught. So for example, you can see the possum here has got a horrible deep cut around its back from this, what I think is a McFlurry lid. That's what it looks like anyway. And you would definitely not want to just cut that off and let the animal go, because it needs some sort of medical treatment, and also to make sure that you remove that safely and not cause the animal to try to defend itself while you're, if you get injured, you can't help the animal. So making sure that you're monitoring the situation and calling it in is going to be very helpful. In the case of mange, so we have a coyote up here with pretty severe mange, you definitely want to call that into the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, because they do track this disease. Mange is a parasite that affects the animal. It causes them to lose their hair, and unfortunately it can be fatal if left untreated. But here's a tricky thing. Some people think, oh, I'll just leave some food out with some medicine in it and then that'll fix the mange. But now you've started this precedent of you feeding wildlife, which in a lot of places is illegal, and in all situations is dangerous and can lead to more animal problems than the one that you were trying to solve. So definitely contact the Illinois Department of Natural Resources if you see something like that. Other illnesses that is very common here is distemper. It's very common in raccoons and skunks, and it can often be mistaken for rabies. It's got a lot of the same symptoms, the uncoordinated movements, muscle twitches, seizures, and this lack of fear and confusion and not really knowing what's going on around them. The biggest thing that you're going to see in distemper versus rabies is this really nasty discharge from the eyes. So there's going to be a horrible, like, mucousy crusting around the eyes. Now, to give you an example of what distemper can look like, I do have a video of a raccoon that was brought into an animal control, I believe in Oregon, has distemper, and they cleaned him up a little bit to take video for educational purposes, to train officers for what to look for. And then he was humanely euthanized because distemper is fatal. There's no real treatment for it, and it is very, very contagious. So it's important to call it in when you see an animal acting in this way, because you don't want to risk it spreading throughout the population or to our pets. So let's take a look at this video. You're going to see the face twitches. Now it looks like they cleaned up his eyes a little bit, but you can still see a little bit of that discharge in the corner of the one eye. And another big sign is that he's being cradled in a sweater by a human, and he's not reacting at all to that. So that's a huge red flag that something is not right with him, that he's lost that natural fear of humans that animals should have and that we should help them keep. Okay, move on from there. So we'll talk about rabies. They do look very similar to distemper, and that's why a lot of people get confused. Rabies is also the more well-known disease. So a lot of times people will call in, oh, I have a rabid raccoon in my driveway. Well, like I said, the most common carrier for rabies in our area is bats. And even then, it's pretty rare. And the reason for that is because of the rabies vaccination for our domestic animals. So we've significantly decreased the exposure rate with domestic animals so that they can't pass between wildlife and our domestic animals, or that it's very hard to. And then that significantly decreases the risk of it being passed on to humans. We did have a case last year where a gentleman in northern Illinois was bit by a bat. The bat tested positive for rabies. I believe he was in his home and the bat got inside and bit him. He refused treatment. The gentleman refused treatment and went against the advice of his doctors. And he did die as a result of that. One of the, I think, the first case in over 60 years of a rabies fatality here in Illinois. Because the thing is, it's 100% treatable if you get the treatment before the disease takes hold. So the time span from when you are bitten to when the disease will take hold varies greatly amongst individuals. It also depends on the bite location, the individual's health, all of that. So we do recommend, if you have a suspected bite, immediately talking to your doctor and looking for next steps. So that is why we have these bats. We bring them in if they are found inside a home where people were sleeping, or if we know that there was an interaction where there possibly could have been a bite, then we will ask to bring the bat in for testing. We will deploy officers, or local police will deploy officers to get the bat for testing, because we need to make sure that there isn't that risk of exposure. So how do we prevent it? Well, we avoid interactions with wildlife to the best of our ability. If we see one, we don't touch them with our bare hands. We keep our homes maintained to prevent them from taking up residence inside the home, and 100% vaccinate your pets. One, it is the law that all domestic cats and dogs need to be vaccinated against rabies. And two, I hear a lot, oh, my cats never go anywhere. They're inside, they're not at risk for rabies. But our biggest exposure rate in this area is a bat getting inside the home. So an indoor cat is at risk for rabies if that happens, just as much as if they were outside encountering other animals. So, besides the fact that, legally you should be doing it, as a responsible pet owner, you want to do it to give your pet the best possible protection against this horrific disease. And if you have an animal that is displaying concerning symptoms, whether you think it's distemper, just like distemper, rabies is caused by a virus that affects the central nervous system. So if you're not sure if it's rabies or distemper, that doesn't matter. Call it in, okay? Always better to play it safe than sorry. Now, a common concern that we get over the phone is when people find baby animals. Now, people do this with the best intentions. They want to save whatever animal it is that they found. They want to save that cute little baby bunny they found in their backyard. They want to save that cute little bird that they found on their porch. The truth of the matter is that often by intervening, we create more issues than if we had just let them alone, because babies, especially baby bunnies, they're not super easy to rehabilitate. They don't do very well under human care. They do best with their moms. And it's not uncommon for babies to be left alone on purpose by their moms, because mom has to go get food, right? So, mama bird is going to go do her bird thing. Baby bird's going to be left alone. If you see the bird fall out of the nest, absolutely, you can put them back in. We'll talk about fledglings in just a minute. If you see a baby bunny on its own in the middle of the day, or if you see a fawn on its own near a wooded area, it's possible that mom left it in a particular place and baby did what all babies do and decided to do its own thing and wandered away a little bit. Typically, mom's going to come back, look for baby, get baby back where it's supposed to be, and take care of it, keep taking care of it. So we don't want to hover over the babies, whatever baby you might find. You don't want to hover because we don't want to scare mom away from coming and claiming their baby. One way you can double check if they are truly abandoned or not is you can just put like a ring of flour around the area that you saw them, go away for a little bit, come back, check over a 24-hour period, see if that flower has been disturbed. That means mom is coming back and forth. Okay, so do what you can to secure that area away from your kids, from your pets, to give them a nice safe space where they're not going to be harassed by anyone, and let mom do what mom does and take care of their babies. Now, we also need to know when a baby is independent, because they might still be really cute and little, but they don't need mom anymore. So, for example, a fledgling bird that you might see on the ground has purposefully left the nest and is trying to learn how to be a bird. So they might be hopping around a little bit. You might see some, they're mom and dad are nearby watching them. You might even see mom and dad come and visit them and give them food from time to time. It is a myth, though, that if you touch a baby bird, that mom's going to abandon it. Birds don't have a great sense of smell, but we want to make sure that if we are interfering, we know where to put them. So do you know where the nest site is? If you see the nest and it's collapsed, can you rig something like a basket with hay near where the nest was so mom can easily find it? Okay. If that bird is hopping around, then it's probably okay. Again, you can keep an eye on it, but chances are it's just learning how to bird. Now, if you have an animal that you either know that mom is deceased, or you haven't seen evidence of mom in 24 to 48 hours, or you notice a severe injury, they might be covered in fly eggs, little black dots, or even maggots, little white dots. they might be cold or wet or crying incessantly, then that means that something has gone wrong and it's best to contact a professional. You know, we want to make sure that we are doing everything that we can for them. But as I said, they're not the easiest animals to rehabilitate. Their best chance is going to be with a professional rehabilitator who possibly has some adult animals that it can go with to help. So we've talked about how to help animals. Awesome. And probably what a lot of you here are for is, what can we do when animals are a little too close, right? We don't want them digging up our gardens or living in our attics. So what can we do to humanely resolve these issues? One, we want to make sure that we are not drawing them in the first place. So we are the biggest influencers to our environment. Okay, we change our entire landscape wherever we go. So we want to make sure that we are not making changes that attract animals even more. You want to avoid littering that includes food and garbage. We want to make sure that there isn't anything that says, woohoo, new restaurant just opened up, raccoons are us, come on down. We want to make sure that we are making those areas unattractive to animals if we don't want them in there. We also do not want to provide food for wildlife purposefully, because a lot of times our food is not safe for wildlife. It can cause them distress. It also encourages them to seek out humans, which can increase conflicts and put them at a bigger risk for issues. So an ounce of prevention is going to go a huge way here. We don't want to provide free food. I can't say that enough. I know I sound like a broken record. Can't say that enough. We want to keep our yards clear of food and secure garbage bins. If we have pet food outside, you don't want to just want to leave it out 24/7. If you have outdoor animals, feed them in a secure manner, or do it in a way that they're not going to leave food laying around all of the time. You want to keep your grills and your barbecues clean, because the smell of that charred meat is going to bring in a lot of those opportunistic feeders, raccoons, possums, even skunks. And then, of course, with them comes the coyotes and the foxes, who will also be attracted to the charred meat smell. So keep those clean as best as possible. If you're doing compost, make sure that they are sealed bins and not just open. You never want to add pet waste or proteins. It'll make it extra stinky and extra attractive to those animals. Now, I want to know who made this fabulous vegetable garden fence, because that's like an A+ rating in my opinion. You don't have to go that crazy, okay? You don't have to build Fort Knox around your tomato plants, but keep in mind having them raised so that animals can't access them, making sure that they can't dig underneath it, blocking off the access as best you can is going to keep your plants safe and the animals out of your area. We also don't want to provide them free places to live. Welded wire is the best to use to block access under decks, sheds, patios, or porches. You want to have it close enough, meshed together, that they're not going to be able to go through. So chicken wire is not going to cut it for most of these animals. And welded wire instead of plastic or screening, because they can't chew through that. You want to have chimney caps and make sure that they are maintained, because there's very little difference to a raccoon between a hollow tree and a hollow chimney. Anytime that you see issues going on around your house, make sure that you're inspecting that, especially the roof and the softening, access up into the attic where people aren't, where it's nice and warm and dark. Those are places that are going to be most attractive. It can also help if you have overgrown areas near your yard. They will use that for cover before entering your yard. So keeping those bushes and weeds trimmed back will give them less coverage to take that first step into the yard in the first place. Now, let's say you have wildlife living a little too close to comfort, and you've tried to eliminate the attractive elements and it didn't work. For whatever reason, these wildlife have decided that your place is awesome and they're not ready to move on. So there are some gentle ways that you can convince them to move out. So basically, what I tell people when they call is animals are attracted to areas that are dry, warm, dark, and quiet. So trying to erase those comforts will make the place unattractive and encourage the animal to move on. So noise like sirens, even a radio playing, if you have animals living in your attic, if you can just play rock and roll music up in the attic to the point where it won't bother you, but it will bother them. Motion activated lights or sprinklers. You can also use scent as a way to ask these animals to move on. So I have not personally used this, but I have heard good things about it. Urine-soaked kitty litter is a good deterrent for some of these animals because kitties are a predator. Now, how you procure the urine-soaked kitty litter is up to you. If you have a cat, great. Okay. I will say that if you don't have a cat, you might be able to supply the urine on your own. That's up to you. I've also heard that, say, if you have any gentlemen living in your household who would like to skip the kitty litter option and directly apply available urine to the perimeters of your home, that is something that I've heard works. Again, I haven't done it myself. I don't know. And I will say, please, please, please be aware if you're going to use that method. Be aware of where your neighbors are, what they can see. Please do not get in trouble with them, the law, just to get rid of any skunks or raccoons living in your area. Okay, all right. Now, I will say they do have predator urine available for sale, but we do not recommend that because I highly doubt it was, nicely asked for, to put it nicely. So we have no assurance that urine that you're buying in a sporting goods store was humanely sourced. So I would highly recommend against that. Instead, you can use ammonia-soaked rags. Just like with the kitty litter, though, the ammonia-soaked rags you will need to replace as the smell fades over time. Hazing, we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, please do not use ammonia from now until August, because a lot of times if you have a den, those babies are already there. They cannot get away from that ammonia smell, and it's going to cause significant problems for them. So at this point, if you can, wait for them to vacate, wait till they're old enough to leave, then keep them from coming back in the future. Hazing for coyotes and other animals is basically to just be big, loud, scary, and frighten them away. Just be obnoxious. So yell, wave your arms, use noisemakers, air horns, throw projectiles in their general area. You don't want to throw it directly at an animal. You don't want to antagonize them, but just make yourself big and scary. You want it to continue until they are gone. Don't give up when they reach your property line, because they'll just wait for you to go back inside and they'll come back. You might need to do it over several days or weeks so that they get the idea that, man, I don't want to live there. A crazy person lives there. They yell at me all the time. When we talk about wildlife conflicts, a big concern is contact between wildlife and pets or children. Predators in our area are primarily crepuscular. That means that they are most active at dawn and dusk. So if we are out with our animals, that helps keep them safe. We don't want to just let our animals out at those times in the yard unsupervised, because you, as a 5 to 6 foot adult person, are going to be much scarier to a coyote than a little chihuahua. Okay. So keep them on a leash if you're out walking with them. We recommend 6 foot standard leashes instead of the retractable ones. A retractable one that can get up to 25 feet away, you no longer have control of your animal at that distance. And that's really, really far for you to be able to help your animal if they encounter something. Our smaller animals, our bunnies, our cats, our guinea pigs, we need to keep them indoors. That's a recommendation across the board. And chickens, we want to enclose them into a coop at night with a solid floor, so wooden, cement, something that can't be dug underneath. That's going to help keep them secure. Okay, sorry guys, I have talked way too much. So we've already talked about trapping a little bit. We definitely want to remove the attraction, not the animal. I want to quickly go over organizations to help, and then we'll have time for questions. So if you're having an issue with wildlife, give us a call. We are always happy to take phone calls and give direction. We do not respond to sick and injured wildlife if you are in the town limits somewhere. If you live in unincorporated DuPage County, then we can come and help, but the animal needs to be contained or immobilized. We don't set traps. You do need to have a special permit for that. If the animal is in the living spaces of a home, we will also respond to that. But again, we are always happy to help answer questions and give you advice. Now, if you live inside town limits, incorporated areas, and you're having a wildlife issue, you can call your local police department. It is their jurisdiction to cover sick and injured wildlife within their city limits. Some of them will have animal control on staff, but it all depends on their capabilities and what they are able to do. The Illinois Department of Natural Resources is a wealth of information for preventatives and living harmoniously. So I highly recommend wildlifeillinois.org. But if you witness something illegal, like someone trapping wildlife, if you find multiple deceased animals and you suspect poisoning, or if you know of someone that is possibly illegally feeding, that might be an instance where you contact the Department of Natural Resources. Willowbrook Wildlife Center has a fabulous wealth of information as well. They will take in sick or injured wildlife and rehab and release to the best of their ability. They are limited in their space and they do not do transport. So you have to bring the animal to them, and they only do native. So if there's an invasive species, they're not going to be able to provide any help. There are additional wildlife rehabilitators in our area, but this is the only one in DuPage County. Private wildlife trappers can come in to remove animals. You definitely want to talk to them about what methods they're using, because for the most part, they're not taking these animals and, packing their suitcases and giving them a happy life somewhere else. These animals are being removed and euthanized. Okay. You want to make sure that if it's gotten to this point and your last resort kind of thing, make sure that they are properly licensed and they have the proper insurance. Talk to them about their policies and estimates, get a guarantee of eviction. And we want to know the entry points and potential entry points of these animals and the number and condition. Because if you remove one raccoon in the month of June and it's a mom, has she left babies behind? Are there babies somewhere in your attic that you weren't aware of? And now what's going to happen to them? So definitely talk to these private wildlife trappers about what they're seeing and also how you can prevent these conflicts from happening in the future. So to sum up everything, if you take away nothing else, take away this: wildlife are essential to the health of our ecosystem. Again, it's that three bubbles that all interact with each other. And if we mistreat one, then it'll spring out and affect the rest of it as well. Enjoy them from a distance. We want to make sure that we are being helpful, and we want to leave wildlife in the wild. I'm sure we've all seen cute YouTube videos of people who have pet raccoons and pet squirrels. The reality of that is those animals do not have good lives. They are wild for a reason, and it is illegal to have wildlife in your home as a pet unless you have the proper licensure, unless you're a proper rehabilitator. So please keep that in mind. And prevention is key to avoiding these conflicts. Wonderful, folks. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I will hang around to see if there are any questions. Real quick, if you have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. I do want to plug some of our upcoming webinars. In 2 weeks, we will be talking about caring for senior pets. So that's March 17th. And then just in time for the Easter buying rush, want to talk about, are you ready for a rabbit in the first Thursday of April? So many people think that these are easy starter pets that they can get their children on a whim. If you have been thinking about getting a rabbit, make sure that you're prepared for the care that they'll need. They can be fabulous, fabulous pets, but it's very, very different from owning a hamster. It's very, very different from owning a goldfish. There's a lot that goes into it. So if you are curious about what all a rabbit needs, join us for that webinar. And if at any point you have questions, you can always reach out to me. My email address is humane.education@dupageco.org. And the office phone number is 630-407-2800. Again, we are always happy to field calls. There is no such thing as a stupid question when it is asked with a genuine wish for knowledge, okay? We always want to make sure that people have the resources they need to enjoy these fabulous animals that we have in Chicagoland and enjoy them at the appropriate distance.